A ruined neighborhood in America, built to keep the peace.
This is a really violent situation. They want better conditions, they want fair pay, they want better housing.
An ancient ghost town in Russia that still shows traces of life.
There's people's belongings left behind, as if they had just left recently.
A beachside resort in Croatia caught up in a bitter conflict.
So this place has got evidence of large caliber rounds being fired into it, which some people might call a war crime.
And a fantastical world hidden in the Mexican jungle.
You see heads, hands sticking out of the ground, stuff that looks like snakes. It's almost like some playground designed by Dr. Seuss.
Decaying relics. Shadows of lost worlds. Ruins haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. In the American town of Campbell, Ohio, one neighborhood looks different from the rest.
Well, at first glance, you wouldn't think anything different of this place. You've got some nice green areas, you've got some residential housing and so on. But, you know, most of the houses seem to be empty.
You can see that there had been some color on them, but now it's faded and chipped away.
This is a place that really looks like it's seen better days, that it once used to just be full of activity, full of people, and now it just looks impoverished and just neglected.
But there's something else that's not quite right about these homes.
They all look the same inside. It almost looks industrial. So it's at odds with what you'd expect for that particular area.
These strangely uniform houses are marked by traces of protest.
Something has happened here. It's not what it once was, and you can't help but wonder what happened to make it reach the state that it's in today.
Tim Sokolov first came here as a teenager.
It was really a hot mess of abandonment. Most of what we're seeing now, you couldn't see. It was overgrown. There were trees and brush everywhere.
Beneath the undergrowth, Tim found the houses were unusually distinctive.
Everything was minimalistic. You know, there was no cabinets, cupboards. This was it. You had a sink and a shelf. This was your fuse box. It's a Frankenstein switch with 2 fuses that ran the whole apartment. And here, the original bathroom, and pipes all exposed, toilet with the tank that had the connection. The tanks were actually made to the walls. And everybody looks here and they says, wow, how do you take a bath in that tub? Little 4-foot tub, cast iron.
Eventually, this neighborhood became home to great poverty. And at number 50 Chambers Street, things took a tragic turn.
2 brothers lived in this apartment. They didn't have their water turned on because they didn't want to pay a water bill. They would go dumpster diving for food. And at one point in time, a neighbor had come over and knocked on the door. And when one brother opened the door, there were legs sticking out from behind the door because the other brother had just passed away, and he just, let him lay there.
Although the area had declined dramatically by the time the brother died, it didn't start out that way. These are the Sheet and Tube Company homes. Their story began with the establishment of a steel mill in neighboring Youngstown.
Youngstown Sheet and Tube was one of the great iron and steel companies of the day. Remember, it's coming about just as the Industrial Revolution is growing in the United States.
But it goes on in the 20th century to become larger than Coca-Cola, larger than Heinz, larger than Johnson & Johnson. It becomes the 5th largest steel company in the United States and the largest employer in Youngstown.
But in 1915, the company hit its first major challenge. Europe was in the grip of the First World War, and American industry was straining to make materials for battle.
The First World War has a really interesting impact on industry in the United States. It ramps up demand, and so it's actually good for business.
I mean, if you think about it, if you're making steel and iron, war is when demand's at its greatest. For the manufacturing industry, it's a boom time.
It was so good for business that Youngstown Sheet and Tube could barely keep up with the demand.
But while the company was making money hand over fist, its employees were facing a very different kind of battle.
Working conditions for these steel workers was not good. And then everything gets speeded up when the war begins. The workers are expected to do more and to work overtime.
There was no union yet, there was problems, and they weren't really trying to pay the guys what they should be paying them. So there was a lot of dissent that started to build.
Low pay and bad conditions created a volatile situation, one that was about to boil over.
In December 1915, 500 employees walk out, they put down their tools, they want better conditions, they want fair pay, they want better housing.
The labor strike continued for weeks, and it was not always peaceful.
The strikers were serious. They didn't just walk off. They were going to engage in whatever tactics they needed to advance their case. And they are so much about business and so serious that the company ends up hiring armed guards to protect their interests and their property.
After the new year, events came to a head.
On January 7th, 1916, the strikers, along with their wives, march up Wilson Avenue to meet a group of scab workers who were coming in to try to take their jobs. That's when things get out of hand.
We're not sure who took the first shot, if it was one of the guards at the steel mill or if it was one of the people in the crowd, but a shot was fired and a riot broke out.
People rioted, they looted some of the buildings, burnt things and so on. And the next day, on the 8th, the Home Guard had to be called in to calm things down, and many of the workers were arrested and jailed.
This is the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Hospital. For some guys, it saved their life by getting right here to the hospital before they could bleed out or, their injury took their life.
The riot was a bloodbath.
By the time the dust is settled, 125 people are injured and 3 people are dead.
Tensions between employer and employee were at an all-time high, so the company made an offer.
The mill workers rioted and burned the city to the ground. And the mill said, this is not conducive to our business model. We can't have this. Let's build them some nice homes that they can live in that will give them a better standard of living.
The housing was going to be connected to electricity. It was going to have running water. And so it was going to provide workers with amenities that were not yet fully standard in the United States.
The buildings were sold as homes of the future. But with the company's eye on the bottom line, these houses would be built on the cheap.
They came up with an ingenious way of doing that by building essentially prefabricated units. They were going to construct houses, one next to each other, that were all the same.
When this apartment complex was created, it stood for everything America stood for: strong, innovative, powerful. This was the epitome of modern building technology.
Entire walls were cast in low-cost concrete. When they arrived on site, they were assembled like flat-pack furniture.
The buildings went together, so when they put the next slab in, it slid right in there into that one, like a lock-in-place kind of Lego. And here's a section of wall. This was actually standing up against here when I first came here, and eventually fell over onto the ground. And when it hit the ground, it's so heavy that we heard it all the way up into the Union Square Park.
You expect cars to come off a production line, not houses, but here they'd flip that around and they were literally producing house after house after house after house, very quickly, very cheaply, but in doing so also creating a community that was desirable for the workers to want to go and move in.
The new homes put an end to the strike action.
That meant that Youngstown were both employer but also landlord. So when something was going to go wrong, things were going to go badly wrong.
The company and the neighborhood prospered for 60 years. But on the 19th of September 1977, the steel mill closed down. Overnight, 5,000 people lost their jobs. It's still known as Black Monday.
And this has this huge ripple effect in the community. And when Black Monday happens, it's sort of the first in a series of plant shutdowns. And so you have this depopulation that starts to happen in the late 70s into the 80s. When you think about the decline of the Rust Belt, that's exactly what this moment is.
Over the next few decades, the sheet and tube company homes slowly emptied and fell into disrepair. Since the 1990s, most of the prefab homes have lain rotting and empty. But Tim is bringing them back from the brink.
We just started a couple years ago renovating apartments to try to bring the complex back to life. And this is one that we renovated, it's finished, and people are just moving in here today, as a matter of fact. This was a modern marvel of building and engineering technology, and it has a lot of history here for our mills and for our nation. It's important to save it. It could help bring back to town. It's our diamond in the rough.
In the highlands of central Mexico lies a fantastical world hidden by dense rainforest.
We are in the heart of this untouched beauty in the mountains, and everywhere you look, you are just surrounded by this canopy that is the jungle.
Then as you drop down beneath the canopy, you realize that there are these strange structures dotted all around.
These remains are difficult to date.
There are some things that look almost like Mayan ruins, others that look strangely modern.
Deeper in the forest, things get even stranger.
There are fantastical pillars and stairs to nowhere.
There's a library with no books and a cinema with no seats.
You see heads and hands sticking out of the ground, stuff that looks like snakes. It's almost like some playground designed by Dr. Seuss.
What kind of people left behind these bizarre traces?
There just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for its existence. I mean, what are all these structures? And what the heck are they doing in the middle of the jungle?
Who would put in so much effort, so much time, so much money to create this fantasy land?
Syra Linyan is the director of this curious place, which dates back to the 1940s.
Estamos a punto de entrar a uno de los lugares más maravillosos de México y del mundo. Un jardín lleno de surrealismo, de magia, belleza natural. Este lugar se le conoce como Las Pozas. Este lugar es único en el mundo.
Las Pozas sits in a densely forested region of Mexico's San Luis Potosi state. And it was this lush, exotic environment that lured its creator here from a very different world.
Edward James was born in 1907 to a British-American family, a very wealthy family, and he was a true British aristocrat.
His godfather was actually King Edward VII. And there were even rumors that he was his illegitimate son.
Edward was still quite young when his father died and left him with this big fortune.
Armed with his huge inheritance, he soon spread his wings and left war-torn Britain behind.
In the early 1940s, he was drawn to Los Angeles. At the time, Los Angeles was a real hotbed for all kinds of emigres, people who had fled the war in Europe. Eventually, he fell in with a group that you might call bohemians, or they were almost like proto-hippies.
While he was living in LA, James decided he wanted to create a retreat that could pull him away from the bustling of everyday city life.
He wanted to create his very own Garden of Eden.
Edward James's obsession with exotic flowers led him to Mexico.
Llega buscando orquídeas en uno de sus viajes, regando un gran número de orquídeas que él no las conocía. Eran orquídeas pues muy bellas.
The orchid is in some way the most sensuous of plants, and that appealed to James's sensibility.
Las Pozas was the perfect place to indulge his passion for this plant.
Las Pozas started off as just two simple huts being built, because James wanted to focus his attention on the orchids.
And he devoted himself to cultivating these thousands and thousands of orchids across his big plot.
James threw himself into this project, and it really bordered on obsession.
Y comienza a traer orquídeas de otras partes de la República, incluso introdujo orquídeas de otras partes del mundo. Todo iba marchando de maravilla, compraba alguna otra propiedad, sembraba, cultivaba, hacía sus experimentos de qué orquídea le gustaba el clima y a cuál no, y así.
But the nurturing climate of Las Pozas was about to deal Edward James a devastating blow.
James was away on a trip when a freak cold snap hit the central highlands of Mexico. And that period of cold weather destroyed his entire collection of orchids.
When returning from a trip to New York, he was confronted with a very unpleasant surprise.
You can imagine James just discovering this devastation. It must have been absolutely crushing.
But the catastrophe pushed him to create something even more extraordinary.
This time, James decided he was going to create his version of the Garden of Eden, but with concrete structures that couldn't be destroyed by freak weather.
Comienza a construir formas de concreto en forma de hoja, en forma de flor, en forma de orquídea.
But Edward James didn't stop at stone flowers. He soon began to indulge his other obsession.
James came of age in a time when some of the most exciting work happening in the arts was the movement of surrealism. This is the idea of artists trying to get in touch with something deeper, something from your subconscious.
He had been friends with famous surrealist artists like Salvador Dali. And after the loss of his orchids, he retreated into a surreal fantasy world.
He created all kinds of fantastical shapes. Everything was as if it just emerged out of some kind of dream.
This garden was constantly evolving, with ever larger and ever more bizarre concrete structures being added.
Eran 36 estructuras que a lo largo de casi 30 años fueron se fueron construyendo.
The sculptural garden really defied all architectural labels. It became this reality of his surrealist thought.
The surrealist structures surround the garden's 9 pools.
Una de las estructuras más icónicas de este lugar es el cinematógrafo o escaleras al cielo.
He put seats there, but no screen. He was having fun.
James gave these structures really kind of unique and whimsical names, like the house with 3 stories that might actually be 5.
At one point, he mentioned something about imagining people in the future coming and finding these shapes in the jungle like there were some ancient Mayan ruins or something like that. And I think that delighted him, having people say, what the heck is this?
For himself, Edward James built a house, a studio, and a sarcophagus. And he found refuge in his garden at Las Pozas until his death.
James died in 1984, and you can imagine this spectacular space just being reclaimed by the jungle and being kind of lost and forgotten, a bit the way he might have imagined.
The garden is a masterpiece and a testament to one man's eccentricity and his desire to be extraordinary.
Today, a dedicated foundation takes care of Edward James's surrealist vision in the way he'd intended.
What's so charming about this space is the way the jungle is allowed to grow up and surround some of the structures.
Él decía que muchas veces que le gustaría que este lugar fuera comido por la naturaleza y en algún momento le gustaría regresar a la naturaleza el espacio que le prestó.
In Russia's Dagestan region, an eerie ruin hides on a mountain peak.
It's high up in the craggy rocks, looking down on the eagles soaring below. And it's hard to make out.
It's almost impossible to believe that anyone could have a town in this place.
But someone once eked out an existence here.
All around it are terraced fields fading into the distance.
Some people call this the Machu Picchu of the Caucasus, and you can really see why.
But why did people come here? Why did people settle here? Why?
Among the ruins lie hints of a conflicted past.
There's people's belongings left behind, as if they had just left recently.
It looks like a town, but there is no movement. No vehicles, no people. This is a ghost town.
Local conservationist Zaur Sokolov is keen to preserve the deserted settlement of Gamsutl.
Мы сейчас находимся на высоте 1700 метров приблизительно над уровнем моря. Это место окружено горами.
At the end of the 20th century, Gamsutl was still inhabited. Zaur remembers its last resident, a beekeeper.
Именно в этих местах мы его застали последним, когда он здесь находился. Он здесь нас угощал за этим столом своим медом, который он... И по рассказам хозяина дома, Абдужалила, этому дому около 300 лет.
For thousands of years, Zaur's ancestors lived in this brutal terrain.
This is a part of the world which has a history dominated by warring tribes and people who feel endangered.
Dagestan has long been a geopolitical flashpoint.
Dagestan is 19,000 square miles. It has a population of about 3.1 million, but it's a very, very diverse area.
The people who lived in Gamsutl belonged to a tribe of elite highland warriors known as the Avars. And there are signs of conflict everywhere.
И каждый аварец знает, что их предок участвовал в каком-то сражении, и его имя, оно восхваляется из поколения в поколение, и это рассказывается предками. Вот такие надгробные плиты, они ставились для тех, кто похоронен на чужбине. Это память о человеке, который погиб где-нибудь в битве. И здесь есть атрибутика воина, то есть пистолет, кинжал, шашка и все прочее.
The position of Gamsutl is another sure sign that this was once a heavily contested battleground.
From here, from this eagle's nest, with its series of watchtowers and drawbridges, and above all, visibility, this was a place that really could be defended.
Эта возвышенность в Гамсутле использовалась как естественная башня. То есть это формирование скальной породы, она очень удачно здесь сформировалась, что наверху сделали такую как амбразуру, и стражи несли здесь дежурство. В этом месте был откидной мост. И это уникально тем, что если сюда подступал человек, какое-нибудь войско, тут можно было сверху закидать их камнями. Село получало полное отражение.
And the Avars' watchfulness would soon be called upon. Originally, the Dagestan region lay between the Christian and Muslim worlds. By the 18th century, the domineering Islamic Persian Empire wanted to take control of villages like Gamsutl. And with the warmongering leader Nadir Shah at the head of the mighty Persian armies, it seemed like nothing could stop them.
Nadir Shah is seeking to expand the territory that he controls and the area from which he can draw revenue, and he does that by fighting and continuously fighting.
He's sometimes called the Napoleon of Persia.
Nadir Shah was determined to take control of Dagestan. But the Persians underestimated the skill of the Avar warriors and their new leader, Ibrahim Uvurada.
Ibrahim was a larger-than-life character. He was aggressive, he was provocative. He was a formidable military and political leader.
The first problem Ibrahim faced, though, was not the Persian armies, but how to stop the Avar warriors fighting between themselves.
What he's got to be able to do is build a coalition who are willing to put aside their constant state of internecine warfare and join in a common cause to resist Persian domination.
Against the odds, Ibrahim Uvurada managed to convince the squabbling Highlanders to create a united front.
There were penalties for not cooperating with this agreement. So, for example, if a village failed to contribute, they were fined 100 sheep, which is significant in this period.
In the end, he assembled an army of 11,000 men, ready to face the Shah.
In 1741, the bloodshed began.
Боестолкновения происходили напротив, где мы сейчас располагаемся, напротив Гамсутля.
When the war was finally fought, it erupted across a front that was tens of miles long. But more important than numbers of troops in an area like this is familiarity and intimacy with the terrain. And the Dagestanis had that.
Ibrahim and his tribes have a massive home field advantage.
The unlikely confederation of Avars took Nadir Shah by surprise.
этом месте он получил свое разгромление. Он был вынужден уже убежать в сторону севера.
Rumour has it that he left his vast treasures of campaign gold here in the mountains, and there are still treasure hunters who come looking for it.
Following his victory, Ibrahim became famous as a Muslim scholar, while Nadir Shah was later assassinated by his own people. The Avars survived in Gamsutl for the next 200 years, until the Russian communists arrived in the 20th century.
The Dagestani region becomes an autonomous Soviet republic within the larger Soviet Union.
The Soviets did their best to quash the Avars' fighting spirit, but in the end, it was nature that won out.
В 70-х годах был очень сильный ливень. После ливня, вот единственным, который связующим звеном, там внизу, который протекает река, над ней был мост, и этот мост, как бы после ливня его снесло.
It's simply too isolated, and people leave slowly over time until in the end there was just one person left. And he died in 2015.
Today, Zaur is determined that the ruins of Gamsutl, which embody the Avar warrior spirit, should live on.
Каждый камень, он такой пропитан историей, он пропитан именно духом предков. Вот это настоящий Дагестан.
Croatia's glittering Dalmatian coast is crammed with tourist resorts, but one stands out.
The buildings form this ghostly backdrop to what should be a picture postcard holiday spot. It's really quite unsettling.
We've got a tourist mecca nearby. This ought to be prime real estate.
An eclectic collection of ruins follow the shoreline.
Each building is very different in style. From brutal concrete corridors and square solid rooms to these beautiful, stunning curves and elaborate archways.
You can still sort of detect the original furnishings, the wallpaper, these beautiful staircases.
The grand old building at the heart of the complex looks the most exclusive.
This facility has got bars and restaurants and courtyards.
Then you have these more modern hotels built in the 1960s, 70s, and even 80s, built at clearly at tremendous expense, that have all been just left to rot.
But there are signs that the luxury here was shattered.
This place has got evidence of large caliber rounds being fired into it, which some people might call a war crime.
These obliterated buildings were witness to one of the bloodiest conflicts of 20th century Europe.
This place is a living time capsule from a period in this nation's history that has definitely not been forgotten.
Jure Maric is a history professor who grew up in the town of Kupari.
Ovaj prvi dio, prvih 10 godina znači dječački djetinjstvo i dolazak na plažu. Tako da je na svom vrhuncu poprilična gužva bila u ovom dijelu, plaže su bile pune, svi ugostiteljski objekti i hoteli su bili puni.
Back then, Kupari was one of Croatia's most exclusive resorts, and the Grand was its first hotel.
Investors come here and they build a big, gorgeous hotel. It's going to be a first-rate hotel. It's got a beautiful view over the Adriatic Sea. It's easily accessible by railroad from anywhere in Europe. This place is gonna make a mint.
Evo ulazimo u ruševine Grand Hotela, početne točke razvoja organiziranog turizma u Župi Dubrovačkoj, koji datira iz 1920.
The Grand Hotel, was incredibly ornate. Spiral staircase up to the upper floors, these beautiful rooms, great views across the sea. So this was quite the impressive tourist destination.
The 139-room hotel kick-started a trend, and for the next 2 decades, holidaymakers flocked to Kupari. But the good times wouldn't last for long.
World War II stopped tourism in this town, but it wasn't the end of it for good. It was about to get a second wind, and on a far greater scale.
After the war, Croatia joined forces with neighboring Serbia, its long-time rival. Along with 3 other Balkan states, they formed socialist Yugoslavia, led by the communist Josip Tito.
Tito has to assure the loyalty of the military. The Serb-controlled Yugoslav army in order to maintain the communist hold on Yugoslavia. So he decides, among other things, to create a holiday resort at Kupari for the Yugoslavian army.
Quickly, hotels started popping up all along this coastline. Huge, brutalist blocks, iconic of the communist era.
In 1978, Tito's forces built the jewel in the resort's crown, the Hotel Kupari.
Samo što je prije izgledalo puno veće nego sad. Tu Pelegrini i Kupari su bili onda spojeni sa toplom vezom, tako da se moglo prolaziti. Onda im koji je put manje zarastao za doći do gore. Znači, sam kompleks Kupari u to vrijeme, kad je bio pod upravom JNA, je bio otvoren. Znači, ja se kao dijete sjećam, u Kupare se moglo dolaziti normalno, kupali smo se.
Tito spent more than $500 million in today's money to create this exclusive resort. And under his rule, the resort thrived, and the sparring Yugoslav states remained united.
Tito's communist powers forced a tentative peace on this region for nearly 40 years.
Tito, of course, was the glue that held together this incredibly fractious country called Yugoslavia. But Tito dies in 1980.
After Tito's death, the fault lines began to show. And in 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union coincided with the rise of another ruthless Serbian leader, Slobodan Milosevic.
U tom trenu dolazi Slobodan Milošević na vlast, pokušava preuzeti vlast i u cijeloj Jugoslaviji, isto tako u Srbiji, međutim...
But Croatians like Jure's family were demanding independence.
The Serbs, of course, opposed this attempt of these nations to break away, and so a civil war breaks out in 1991.
This spot becomes fought over between the Serbs and the Croats, and it gets very nasty.
Kupari is just 6 miles down the coast from the strategically vital Croatian city of Dubrovnik, which Milosevic's Serbian-led forces were determined to take.
Fierce attacks and bombings began in the city. It became known as the Siege of Dubrovnik.
They try to pound the Croatians into submission by shelling the beautiful ancient Croat city of Dubrovnik. And just nearby, there's Kupari.
During this time, a small Croatian force holds up in Kupari to, fight the Serbian blockade and try to attack these Serbian artillery positions. So then, of course, the Serbs turn their guns on Kupari and they shell it for 6 months.
The Serbian-led assault was merciless. Kupari's Grand Hotel took the greatest hit.
To su direktni pogodci. Kroz 10. mjesec konstantno traju napadi, konstantno traje granatiranje. Najveći udar u stvari se vidi na ovom dijelu s obzirom da su Jugoslavenske narodne armije konstantno bombardirale, znači sa ovog dijela konstantno bombardirale cijelu župu, naravno.
The resort was absolutely devastated. And then when the Serbian infantry came in to clear the Croats out, they cleared them with phosphorus grenades, burning them out entirely, leaving the place, essentially a gutted ruin on a beautiful stretch of coastline.
It seems mad that they'd completely destroy what they themselves had built, but they were determined to make sure there was nothing left for the Croats.
By the end of the bombardment, this was no longer a habitable place.
It took just 2 weeks for the Serbian-led forces to recapture the coastline. They destroyed 2,000 homes in the process.
Šteta u svim tim napadima na prostoru cijele župe gdje je od 6.000 ljudi gotovo 5.500 iselilo, gdje su svi objekti bili spaljeni, tako je ova cijela zona. Potpuno ista priča, znači obiteljska kuća naša je stradala od granata. Nakon što smo pobjegli, palili. Koje su to težnje ljudske bile i koji su razlozi, to je dosta teško.
The Serbian-led occupation of Kupari lasted until May 1992, when the Croatians finally took it back. Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic died in 2006 while standing trial for war crimes. And the decimated resort of Kupari has still not recovered.
The level of devastation here is horrifying, and it's basically sat like that ever since.
Dubrovnika i šire, ali nažalost evo već 30 godina čeka bolje dane i čeka neku vrstu obnove i vraćanja staroj slavi.
But good news, the site has been bought by investors and there's plans to redevelop it as a great beach resort.